So the narrative is extremely simple to boil down. We can draw more threads to it as we look through what they're saying. But basically, the narrative is a bunch of partial truths, half-truths, or out-and-out lies that have been twisted to suit a fabric of reality that assumes we can unquestionably depose Gaddafi and the Jamahiriya, and there will be no debate about whether we should or shouldn't do it, other than our own self-interest calculations. So the first of these narrative elements is that Gaddafi is either evil or mad, and or something to that effect, such that he and all of his followers must go away immediately without any question. Then I'm going to show a clip that shows this sort of thing, that people aren't willing to actually face up to their hypocrisy. There's also never any mention made, and this is what I'm going to walk through into a survey on the Western media, that they had the highest standard of living in Africa, and I see the U.S. in many standards of living indexes. So without this information, the assumption that Gaddafi is a monster and that the Jamahiriya was a bad government is just out and out despicable, that you would not arm people with such information when making such allegations, because with incredible claims, incredible evidence is required, and these are paired pieces of data that should be brought into the equation. Then the next part of the narrative is that the rebels obviously represent all of the people of Libya, which as time has worn on has seemed to be less and less true, and we will show you a clip about that. Then the next element is the rebellion was peaceful and the government went out and machine gunned everybody. The actual facts are that there was a release of the biggest release of Islamic militants that Gaddafi had ever had the day of the rebellion, as luck or fate would have it, or plan. This may be a factor why they talk about Al-Qaeda. It's also the area of Libya where most of the militants that fought in Iraq and Afghanistan came from. But that's not to discredit them. It's simply to say that we don't know who supports whom unless we have surveys, and those are not easy to come by, and they aren't even attempted, from what I can tell. So any kind of evidence that there's broad support for Gaddafi that was there under their nose all along would represent part of this false narrative. In and of itself, simply being ignorant and hoping that people like your guys, although reprehensible, it's not enough to indict these people for incompetence, which the whole story will. The rebellion was peaceful. Okay, we talked about that. There was also a break-in to several government armories of some kind. So yes, they did shoot some protesters. It was an overreaction. I think perhaps as many as hundreds of people were killed before the rebels turned to weapons. But the rebels turned violent early in the clash with Gaddafi in a way that did not happen in the other countries, and they were faced with just as odious security forces. So there's no mention of the fact that there was a lot of very disturbing elements at the start of this. Not to take away from the right of the people to have freedom, which certainly they do, and that wasn't the Gaddafi government's strong suit. Their strong suit was a very good social services network for education and healthcare and housing and food and gasoline and money to start a farm. Okay, so then the next issue is not actually placing American troops in harm's way. Allows the executive discretion, controlled levels of violence overseas. Another unstated things about this is that our troops suffer when they are put into battle or have to kill someone or be killed, and the government is not willing to give them their full support. It is dishonest and it's wrong, and I don't know why people don't talk about that more often. And then no willingness to delve into candidate Obama's position. Candidate Obama roundly condemned executive abuse of the war power, which had been reserved by the founders to Congress. And one of these founders has said that no branch of government is more hasty to plunge into war than the executive, hence the reason they restricted them and were most sensitive about the executive, in particular warmongering. So the little white lie of is where it all starts, the whole key of it, is claiming, the whole claim that Gaddafi murders his own people is essentially this one sentence he uttered. And if you've listened to Gaddafi's speech, he's constantly fuming. And Libya has not invaded anybody in 25 years. And the only time they were invaded anybody was they aided the government in the civil war of their neighbor to the south. They lost, and they armed rebellions all over the world, including Nelson Mandela. That's another thing I should mention, is when they talk about aiding terrorists, and for some Bostonians, the IRA was being funded by them and Gaddafi at the same time. IRA wasn't Republican at the time and then Mandela and the ANC. Now, I'm not trying to advocate for these groups that might kill civilians, but these are, from his point of view, he would arm virtually any revolutionary army, and in so doing, that would also antagonize these autocrats, like Saudi Arabia and Qatar. And Qatar lost all of its honor by the way they're doing their Al Jazeera reporting from Libya. It is completely one-sided as far as I can tell, and I thought they were the finest network in the world. So that's the narrative. Thank you.